Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website. Would ask our guests in-house to be so courteous to check that cell phones have been muted as we prepare to begin. And, of course, our internet viewers are always welcome to send questions or comments simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. And we will post the program on the Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference following today's presentations. Hosting our program is Justin Johnson. Justin is a senior policy analyst for defense budgeting policy. He is in our Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign and National Security Policy. He has over a decade of Capitol Hill experience on defense and foreign policy issues. Before joining us here at Heritage, he was Deputy Chief of Staff and Military Legislative Assistant for Representative Doug Lamborn, a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee. Mr. Johnson also received a master's degree from the Naval War College. Please join me in welcoming Justin Johnson. Justin.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. It's an exciting day. We were preparing for the worst. We're preparing to hold this event in an ark if the hurricane came this direction, and instead we've got a gorgeous day outside. So thanks for spending a little bit of a gorgeous day inside with us to talk about defense reform. Before I introduce Jerry, I'd just like to explain a little bit about what we're trying to do here. This is the first of what will be a series this fall on defense reform, discussing what should be in next year's National Defense Authorization Act. This week, the NDAA is obviously the current NDAA is getting a great deal of attention, potential veto, but we're trying to start the conversation about next year's NDAA. What should be included in that in terms of reforming how the Pentagon, how the military works and operates. To begin this series, we've got a great panel today to look at innovation in the defense industrial base. Jerry McGinn, or Dr. McGinn if you prefer, is currently the Principal Deputy Director of Manufacturing and Industrial Base Policy inside the Pentagon. Before this role, most immediately prior, was President of McGinn Defense Consulting, but has had a long career throughout the defense industry doing a variety of interesting things. He's worked at Deloitte, he's worked at Kinetic, he's worked at Northrop Grumman. I'm sure there's others. I served at RAND, previously in the U.S. Army as an infantry officer, PhD and MA from Georgetown, and did his undergraduate degree at the Military Academy, and has a beautiful wife, Kelly, and 4 children. So obviously a busy and accomplished guy here to talk to us about defense reform today. So please join me in welcoming Jerry McGinn.
Thanks, Justin. It's great to be here and great to be back at Heritage. As Justin noted, I'm in the Office of the Secretary of Defense now, but I was until recently in industry. So I spent the last decade in industry. Now I'm part of the problem. I'm in the Pentagon bureaucracy, but it's great to be back here and to talk about defense reform, which is a real critical topic, especially in today's environment. And we're very fortunate to have a panel of real experts on these issues. I know that because I've written with 2 of them particularly, Peter and Steve, and know Sam, and it's great to meet Justin as well. And defense reform, what is defense reform? We took a stab at it, Steve and Peter and I, at defining it at 4 principal components in an article we wrote earlier this year. And we talked about it being acquisition reform, industrial base policy, international defense cooperation, and defense enterprise reform. I mean, I don't know if that's the right way to frame it, but that's a good start for a conversation. And fortunately, we've got Peter here who knows the international defense cooperation space, security cooperation space, cold, is tremendously accomplished in that area. And then we have Stephen and Sam, who have just recently written on this topic of acquisition reform, have been in and around these issues for a number of years. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation that's going to follow my remarks. And what I thought I would do would chat a little bit about acquisition reform, which is a big focus of my office, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. And then I'll focus a bit more on my specific office, the Office of Manufacturing and Industrial Base Policy, and talk about some industrial base efforts that are underway. First, acquisition reform. Acquisition reform has been a major focus of the department's leadership throughout this administration. There's a well-known series of better buying power kind of initiatives that was started by the current secretary, Dr. Ash Carter, when he was Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. The most recent iteration of better buying power, BBP 3.0, was signed out this spring by Undersecretary Frank Kendall, my boss's boss. And that focuses on innovation, so that, again, the panel is timely. And I want to paraphrase from the implementation guidance that Mr. Kendall put out with Better Buying Power to talk about one of the specific issues which is central to the coming years. And the department's military systems are developed and fielded on timescales that are much longer than commercial technology. You know, the refresh on the next carrier is a little bit longer than the next iteration of the iPhone, for instance. Okay, so melding these different life cycles, these different refresh cycles, is very challenging for the department, because the department will start a major acquisition system, and refreshing the technology that's in it often is hard to do. So the complex and unique requirements of advanced weapon systems are major factors driving this challenge. But in order to remain dominant in the field, the department needs to be more effective at incorporating technology advances as it develops systems. So achieving this objective is going to require the identification of methods and best practices for improving access to commercial technology. So one very well-known initiative that you've probably heard about is the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, or DIUX as it's better known, which is the outreach of the department to Silicon Valley. Secretary Carter has been to Silicon Valley twice within the last several months, and this is an effort to show the department's determination to improve how we engage with what we inelegantly call non-traditional defense companies. Another kind of lower profile but potentially useful effort is one of the Better Buying Power 3.0 implementation efforts that my office is currently leading. And that's one thing we're trying to do, is we're creating a handbook of existing authorities and vehicles available for use by DoD program managers, agreements officers, contracting officers, and other stakeholders to improve how DoD accesses commercial technology. These authorities range from some very well-known to some not so well-known, but the idea is to put these in one place that DoD officials can access to at least understand potential ways that they can engage with non-traditionals. They are things such as other transaction agreements, FAR Part 12, Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIRs, and CRADAs, as well as things such as prizes or challenges, and public-private partnerships. These are often overlooked, but they can be effective tools as we work to improve how DoD engages with non-traditionals, here's that word again, to face our national security challenges. Now, as Justin mentioned, and as some of the colleagues on the Hill also have some strong ideas on how to improve acquisition. And we look forward to working with them when the NDAA is finalized, to see signed by the President, on those ideas. But moving on to industrial base policy, my boss, Mr. Andre Gudger, who's the acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Manufacturing and Industrial Base Policy, or MIBP as we call it. He has written that a strong, responsive, and healthy industrial base is critical to our national security and provides access to the world's best products, most innovative technologies, and cutting-edge capabilities that have kept the United States military ahead of its adversaries for more than half a century. End quote. Given the tremendous challenges we face as a country and the conflicting pressures that industry faces, He argues that modernizing our industrial base is, quote, the national security challenge of our time, end quote. Given this remit, we in MIBP are working, are working to have an appropriate impact and create incentive structures that help shape how the department works with industry in key areas. And 3 areas that I'm going to discuss are central to our office responsibilities. The first is the area of manufacturing. Manufacturing has been a real emphasis of the president since he came in office. The national network of manufacturing innovation that has been established. And as part of this, numerous manufacturing institutes of innovation have been created through public-private partnerships between the federal government and consortia of private companies, universities, and not-for-profit organizations to tackle significant manufacturing challenges. DoD has led the establishment of 5 of these institutes, and in areas such as additive manufacturing, photonics, flex hybrid electronics, and a couple others. And we're finalizing the selection of the final institute that DoD is standing up, focusing on revolutionary fibers and textiles. And the intent of these institutes is to create a permanent, a self-sustaining manufacturing capability in these critical areas. So there's some cost share between the department and these consortia on these specific areas. A couple other programs that DoD can use to help build manufacturing capabilities or to sustain manufacturing capabilities in critical areas are a couple programs that are under the bailiwick of our office, and that's the Manufacturing Technology Program, or ManTech, and as well as the Title III programs under Title III of the Defense Production Act. And these programs have done some amazing work in some critical areas, such as developing chip-scale atomic clocks, which are used for GPS-denied environments, as well as lightweight ammunition to help reduce the load carried by our soldiers. The second area that our office focuses on is in the core area of industrial base assessments. Our office regularly conducts assessments of key sectors of the defense industrial base. We work closely with the military services. We look at sectors such as electronic warfare, rotary and fixed-wing aircraft, ground vehicles, and the like, to help identify those capabilities in our industrial base that are fragile and critical that we have to maintain, and to help inform our DoD leadership about the challenges facing in the industrial base. Given the tremendous variety of challenges coming at the department and coming at our country more broadly, these assessments are important, but we have to take a more proactive and predictive approach to how we look at our industrial base. Thus, we are trying to, we need to understand better where the industrial base is heading and help find out ways that we can figure out where we would like it to head. And so to do that, we need to adopt a more kind of a different approach using business tools such as business intelligence and analytics to help us in analyzing the defense industrial base. The third area is on global markets and investments. The department needs to be able to scan the global business environment to identify trends that are going to impact our industrial base in the coming years. We currently address specific cases, for example, of mergers and acquisitions for antitrust concerns under the Hart-Scott-Rodino Act, and as well as the national security implications of foreign companies purchasing U.S. defense companies under the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States, better known as CFIUS. These reviews are important and necessary, but they are sometimes not sufficient given the global trends that are impacting the national security environment. Therefore, this is early days, but we're exploring ways to, as Undersecretary Kendall said last week, to preserve the diversity and spirit of innovation that have been central to the health and strength of our unique strategic defense industrial base. And overall, this new approach to industrial base matters in DoDs requires a close collaboration between the department and industry. We currently work closely with industry associations and specific companies on these and other industrial base matters, and we look forward to growing this partnership in the coming months. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time and look forward to your questions and to the insights of the upcoming panel. So, thanks.
We should have a couple microphones. So please raise your hand, wait for a microphone, identify yourself, ask a question, and then we'll take a few questions and then we'll have the panel.
Hi, Sean Lingus with FCW Magazine. You mentioned taking a more proactive approach to kind of nurture fragile and critical sectors in the DIB. Can you give some examples of sectors that you've identified that need protection and how you're using business analytics to do that?
That's a good question. I mean, I think some of the programs that we do, like the ManTech program I mentioned, we're developing capabilities that right now don't have enough constituency within the military services to do a program necessarily, but we're trying to build capacity on, such as this chip-scale atomic clocks. But one area, for instance, that we're looking at is the area of microelectronics, where we have one major producer of domestic producer of microelectronic chips, and how do we maintain the capacity needed for to ensure the integrity of U.S. defense DoD systems. So that's one area we're looking at quite closely.
Thank you. Ryan Richardson, Lockheed Martin. Thank you very much for your talk. Speaking to the same question on industrial base assessments, when your office assesses that there are areas that are deemed critical and fragile, is there a uniform department-wide policy that's undertaken to assure that those areas are supported or looked after in certain ways once they're identified? How does your office then, after figuring out what work needs to be done in certain specific industries, what's the next step forward in supporting those groups?
It's a very good question, and there are a couple of vehicles to do that. I mean, the most traditional vehicle is to work with the services to identify, who's the best service responsible for that industrial-based capability, and making sure that there's a plan within their POM, within their budget process, their budget development, their capability development, that will address or mitigate this challenge in the coming years. So that's the most traditional way. But there are the other levers, such as some of the programs I mentioned, that can help fill that gap as well.
Thank you. Kathleen, Mystery Century Visions. I have a question on smaller private sector firms. How do we begin working with you?
Yeah, it's a real focus of this effort of better buying power, which is we spend a lot of time with the major defense companies and the major trade associations, and that is invaluable. But 60% of what they do at the prime level is then subbed out to smaller companies. So we definitely work really hard to improve how we do that. My boss's former job was the director of the Office of Small Business. And last year was, I think, the first time the department met its small business goals in recent memory. So there's a real concerted effort to help to reach out in that way. And I think also in my office is looking to become more proactive as in how we reach out to become more of a focal point for industry engagement. We're not the small business office, but to help kind of point folks in the right directions so they can engage with their appropriate DoD customer.
Thank you. Sam Silverly with Sinewave Ventures. I think there are a lot of focuses on what DoD can do to better engage with the startup community. But what would you like to see the startup community do to get on DoD's radar or make things easier for DoD? I was on that side, well, not really the startup side, but I was on the industry side until very recently. And the biggest sort of thing that I've seen is that we often kind of we create
we create challenges that don't have to be there. I mean, so the communication, I think, is the key for both industry and government. I think we as a department have to be more kind of forward-leaning and creating opportunities for engagement with startups and with non-traditionals or whatever we're calling them, as well as our prime companies. So we have to do a better job there, and we have to create vehicles that kind of address or at the front end some of the concerns of startups. I mean, things, the big concern everyone talks about is IP for small business, for startups or small businesses. But there are a number of vehicles, like that handbook I mentioned, which we're going to put out soon. Addresses a number of authorities where the private sector retains IP control, and these are startups to help companies and DoD kind of develop relationships and see if there's a fit. There may not be, but there may be something that could develop in time to something more significant, a program of record over time.
Thank you. Sandra Irwin with National Defense. I wanted to ask you about the study that you mentioned that's been going on for a while, the sector-by-sector study. We heard so much about the study, but not necessarily the findings or what DoD plans to do with that information. What is the takeaway or the takeaways that you're seeing from that study? What are some of the problem areas in the industrial base? Thank you.
Okay, you're talking about the sector-by-sector, tier-by-tier analysis, the S2T2 as it was called, right? That was an effort done by by Mr. Brett Lambert when he led the office a couple of years ago and was continued on. That effort was very useful in identifying some areas that in the industrial base, one of them being in microelectronics and a few others. And in doing that, that process was very good, but it was also a sort of a snapshot in time. It was done by surveys, what we're trying to do is take the ideas in that analysis and turn it into something more dynamic and predictive, which is why we're taking the fragility and criticality kind of methodologies that we used in that S2T2 analysis and trying to use business intelligence and analytics tools to help us, draw from existing subscription services, that we already have membership, that we already, business tools, such as Bloomberg and, or open source material, just, the internet, where there's tremendous amounts of data about business and sectors that we're concerned about. But we don't have the tools really to analyze that, the big data kind of interpretive tools. And so that we're trying to take the ideas from that and create something more dynamic and predictive is what we're trying to do.
Great. Please join me in thanking Jerry.
Sure, thanks.
At this point, if the panelists could join me. Again, thank you, Jerry, for those remarks. I think it's very helpful setting the stage. Excited to now get to join three people who are much smarter than I am. It's one of the best things about doing panels is you get to ask your smart friends and colleagues to come educate me. So let me briefly introduce these three fine gentlemen, and then we'll go into some discussion, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience as well. To my immediate left is Stephen Rodriguez. He is managing partner of Coldon Strategic Advisors. I'm saying that correctly. Wide variety of experience in his career, both on Wall Street and venture capital, within government. He's done a lot of interesting things. He's also very involved with the Council on Foreign Relations. He's a New York Fellow of the National Review Institute. He's chairman of the Foreign Policy Initiatives Leadership Council, and serves on at least 3 corporate boards, if I got my numbers correctly. Has written extensively on defense reform and innovation. And I want to note at this point that all of these folks, actually, Jerry and these three panelists, have written extensively on defense reform, much of it on the great web magazine, War on the Rocks. So I would encourage you to go find what these gentlemen have written. Next to Stephen is Peter Lichtenbaum. Peter is of counsel with Covington Burling. He has a wide, actually, excuse me, you're a partner. My bad. It's a wide experience, both in government and out of government. He has served as the Assistant Secretary for Export Administration in the Department of Commerce, was in the General Counsel's Office in the Department of Treasury. He was a Vice President with BAE, and now advises clients on a range of compliance, export control issues, as well as just defense and foreign policy issues. Next to him is Sam Zega, who is currently the Director of Strategy and Development with Airbus. He has, like me actually, is a previous Hill staffer, so I try to keep, there are a few Hill staffers who go on to do better things. He's served in a variety of roles with Airbus, including integration manager. Prior to joining Airbus, as I mentioned, he worked for Senator John Warner and has an MBA from Georgetown as well. I won't even get into the education of these three because it's extensive, so I'll just leave it there. Again, I want to thank the panelists for being here. Defense reform is a topic that I think it's quite interesting right now. It's being discussed in the Pentagon. The current National Defense Authorization Act has a lot of defense reform components in it. Jerry mentioned the visits from the Secretary of Defense to Silicon Valley. But before we get too deep into it, I'd love to just kind of start with the basics and ask the question, what is defense reform? Why should, whether it's a member of Congress or a policymaker in Washington pay attention to this, or even the opposite? Why should anyone who outside of Washington care about this thing called defense reform? And perhaps we'll just go down the panel and tell us what you think defense reform is, maybe what it should be, and why it matters.
Well, first up, I'd like to thank both Justin Johnson as well as Steve Bucci and Jim Carafano for actually caring about defense reform. I also, I think it's pretty exciting when you see a lot of friends in the audience, as well as have friends at think tanks who feel similarly, or even, frankly, even if they disagree with you on substantive matters, are willing to have a discussion and host a framework like this. So I look forward to the coming panels that Justin has arranged. I also realized, actually I've realized this unfortunately before, that I named my company based on a derivation of one of the hardest ice climbing peaks in North America, and unfortunately now when it's pronounced by my friends it sounds like a cold remedy. So it is not indeed cold on, it's pronounced cold in, but that's unfortunately what happens when you put an O except for an E in your company name. Why does defense reform matter? I think Jerry talked about the definition a little bit, so which I agreed with, so I'll leave it there. I think defense reform matters because it's really about national security, and it's about maintaining a qualitative and quantitative edge to national security. So Secretary Gates, before he left office, made a rather prescient remark given the actions in East Asia right now, which said that no amount of technology can replace the fact, and I'm paraphrasing here, that you need a carrier battle group in East Asia and in the Persian Gulf at the same time. So I think right now what we're approaching is this paradox of exquisitely expensive technologies that are fantastic in every single way. They exceed the imagination in many ways, and in many ways are not even known to people without a clearance who can actually look at them, and yet they take decades to build at the cost of, referencing the recent aircraft carrier, $14 billion to build. So you have a camp on one hand that says we should have these assets to take 20 years or more to get the initial operating capability and costs $14 billion. And you have the other camp that says, well, we need a 600 ship Navy again. So those two things unfortunately don't work. And frankly, we will never have the defense budget that we need to get to either one of those solutions. Hence the need for defense reform. I have a lot to say on this matter, but before I turn it over to Peter, I would just highlight our friends in the Army. The Army's main systems right now consisting of the Black Hawk, it's a utility helicopter, the Abrams main battle tank, the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, the Apache attack helicopter, and the Stryker were fielded in 1979, 1980, 1981, 1984, and then the Stryker being, the newest of all of them was 2002. Those are the Army's major platforms. So I think that tells you a little bit about reform and its current state, and why does it matter? And why does it matter? Because quite frankly, the Chinese are stealing our stuff and fielding it faster than we are. So it's one thing if you can be expensive, but at least get on with it. And I have other remarks that will highlight that later.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate Heritage convening the forum. I guess my perspective as somebody who served in an internationally focused role in the government, as well as when I was at BAE, is on the international dimensions of defense reform, and obviously. We have a Defense Department because of the international role that the U.S. has as the leader of the free world. Yet, it seems to me, in my experience over the past several years, that we are often challenged through our defense system. And one well-known aspect, for instance, was the inability to get information from the field quickly enough with the IED threat in Iraq and then Afghanistan, culminating in, the waste of many lives unnecessarily, given the technologies that were out there in the global marketplace, and the need for the Secretary of Defense to essentially take matters into his own hands and drive the response to that, which said to many of us in industry that there was a broken process for driving innovation, necessary innovations for the warfighter up through the Pentagon. Ultimately, successes were achieved in that fight through, among other things, the MRAP program that BAE played an important role in, bringing technology from South Africa to the DoD. So it was a great example of international collaboration producing a necessary reform. But the larger lesson that we should learn is that we don't have a very good system for seeking innovation from the warfighter to the procurement system. And how do we deal with that in what is a very hierarchical, top-down organization, as Jerry said, multi-year planning? How do we make innovation responsive to the warfighter and much more timely? So that, I think, is a major challenge for all of us here on the panel and in the DoD. I would also mention the need for affordability, which Steve mentioned, and I think that, obviously it has a domestic dimension in that resources are limited, and the department and contractors are having to do more with less. But I also see it from the international side where, when I or others talk to the international customers, they view the U.S. offering as one that is the Cadillac version that maybe the U.S. can afford, but nobody else can afford. And if we're going to actually build successful international partnerships, which this administration, logically enough, wants to do, and I think many on the Republican side feel the same way, that, we'd rather have the folks in the region taking the lead in these fights. We need to have them having strong partnerships, and that starts with buying American gear. And if we don't have the gear that they can afford that is the 80% solution, then they're not going to buy that. And I've had those very direct conversations with, strong U.S. allies who say, we'd love to buy American. You don't have products that meet our needs at the price point we can deal with. So those are, perhaps some points to start us off with. I'll turn to Sam for further comments.
Sure. Well, thanks, Justin. Thanks to you and Heritage for putting together this discussion. I think it'll be pretty interesting, and it's already been great to hear some of Jerry's comments. In terms of why defense reform matters, to try and poke at your question a little bit more, I'll offer a couple thoughts. And the first is pretty basic, but I think perhaps sometimes those of us that go to work in an office every day forget about it. But defense reform matters because people's lives are on the line. And if you think about somebody in uniform that is off in Afghanistan or elsewhere, they ought to have the best equipment that we could get them at the best price. And sometimes I think we come up short. So this is really about, people's sons, daughters, neighbors. That's what we're talking about at the end of the day, and I think we need to continue to keep that in mind. A second thought as to why all this matters is, I think Americans work hard for their money, and they like to see their tax dollars spent wisely, and arguably sometimes that doesn't happen. DARPA's put out a great chart, and if you could sort of imagine an X and Y axis, excuse the sign language here, but they've got a chart that shows the amount of time it takes to field a new system these days. And it was primarily comparing military aircraft to commercial aircraft to the automobile industry. And if you look at what they did, you could see the automobile industry, the time to field a new design has actually decreased over the last decade or so. Commercial aircraft, that's increased, but at a pretty shallow rate. Whereas if you look at military aircraft, the time to field one of those has gone up at basically a 45-degree angle. So every system takes substantially more time than the next to field. And if we continue down that trend line, we're probably going to be looking at making Norm Augustine's cliche about having one aircraft to share among all the services in 2050 or 2054. That's probably going to come to fruition, which would be, I think, terrible for everyone. So I'll leave it there, but I think those are the reasons why we need to be serious about this.
Great, thank you guys. Innovation. It's in the title of this event. We've all used the word already. What does innovation mean? What do we mean by that? What does it look like? I'm picking up that we believe that the DoD is bad at innovation. Why, if you agree with that statement, why is it bad at innovation? And is there anywhere, is it a unique DoD problem, or is it a government problem? Are governments just bad at innovation? Are there parts of government that are good at innovation? So tackle innovation?
Well, the definition of innovation is to make changes in something established. Kind of sounds like DoD. But unfortunately, I think we're arguing about the problem in the wrong way. See, DoD is actually quite good at technology. It's inappropriate and unfair for people to either talk or write articles saying or lamenting the fact that how bad DoD is at technology. They're actually very good at technology, and the industrial base is good at supporting them too. That's not the problem. The problem is in the transition rate. So what I mean by that is we spend a significant amount of money, billions and billions and billions of dollars on R&D. So what does that mean? We are developing, cool kit, whether it's, cool pens or cool planes to field to the warfighter, right? The challenge is that no one is buying the cool kit that we are making through our R&D efforts. So we're coming up with a bunch of great stuff that sits on the proverbial Pentagon bookshelf. That is the problem. DARPA's transition rate, i.e. the DARPA programs that they have, coming up with cool things like the internet, that's great, but that was decades ago. Their transition rate today is approaching 2%. So that means, again, they're coming up with great stuff that is ending up on the bookshelf because the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, are not buying the stuff that their R&D labs, whoever they may be, are producing. So, your question is, why is DoD bad at it? They're bad at it because we have a series of process and bureaucratic models in place that make it very, very difficult for the existing DoD R&D labs to transition the fantastic technology they're developing, and we make it even harder for non-traditionals, as Jerry mentioned, to engage the U.S. government. In fact, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I've written repeatedly on the silliness that is DoD outreach to Silicon Valley. Why in the world would a non-traditional company such as Facebook or Pinterest or even Nest or Tesla even want to touch DoD? 18-month sales cycles, opaque contract language, money that may be there or maybe not. I mean, look, as someone who's sold in large enterprise businesses on the commercial side, they have their own warts, but I'll take that any day over a lengthy DoD process where there may or may not even be money at the end of the tunnel. And that's very discouraging for a lot of non-traditionals. So I appreciate what DoD has done to date on outreach to, well, again, we'll call them Silicon Valley, but basically venture-backed technologies. But in short, the answer is it's not a communications issue, right? They know exactly who DoD is. So the reason they're not, working with DoD is not because they're not aware of the fantastic funding opportunities that exist here in Washington. And that's a major problem. It's something a lot of us have been working to address, and I think it's something that we'll comment in further detail going forward here.
So, Steve, rather than offer a comment of my own, let me offer a question to you, because I thought you made an interesting point, but I wanted to understand what it was based on. You mentioned the 2% transition rate out of DARPA to the procurements, but is that because, or is it both? Because usually when you have an either-or question, it ends up being both. Is it primarily because of the budget constraint that everyone's operating under these days? Or is it because the innovations are cool, to use your term, but not actually must-haves for the warfighter?
I mean, it's a good question, and I think it's both and more. I mean, look, we spend this, I mean, no one actually is certain how much the Chinese spend, but the consensus is we pretty much spend as much on defense as almost everyone else. Mm-hmm. So we'll just kind of leave that out there as a generalization. We're spending a lot of money, and yet either due to timeliness or in the volume of units, we're not getting the capability that, as Sam said, the taxpayers say they need or say they deserve for the money they're putting out there. So why is that? I think part of it is money, but again, we're in a budget environment right now where you have the Budget Control Act, right? So those are budget cuts separate from sequestration. So Budget Control Act goes into effect 2011. That's what we're operating under right now. Sequestration is the specter that's hanging over us constantly. And then now we're in a budget environment where the administration has tied military spending to domestic spending, right? So that's a linkage strategy that I thought you would only see in diplomacy, like in the Middle East, and yet the administration, again, this is what they've done. They have tied military spending to domestic spending, saying for every dollar that goes up, you got to have a dollar that goes up out of this pile as well. For every dollar that goes down in military spending, you got to have a dollar that goes down, or hopefully a dollar that goes down in domestic spending. So that's why we're under this veto threat right now. The innovation challenge that we've seen is that you have acquisition and acquisition executives and operators, so the people, the warfighters who are supposed to be using this technology, and the acquisition executives completely separated, right? So the acquisition executives are off, doing God's good work. Meanwhile, the operator is completely divorced from that paradigm. And I think one of Justin's questions was, who does this well right now? And Well, look, US SOCOM does it pretty well because the acquisition executive and the operator sit side by side, right? But is US SOCOM scalable, across the entire DoD enterprise? That, I don't know.
Sam, do you want to comment on this and maybe also talk a little bit about defense, the existing defense industrial base, and what the thoughts are with all this focus on Silicon Valley?
Sure. Yeah, I think that how you define innovation maybe is colors the kind of answer you get when you talk about is DoD good or bad at it. I think certainly there's a lot of stuff they do great. You're not going to go to Silicon Valley and ask them to build you a B-2, right? It's not going to happen. On the other hand, if you need some new innovative, phone or something like that, that may be a good place to go. So we got to kind of keep that in mind as we discuss innovation. There's just some things that the defense industrial base does that no one else can do. But of course, at the same time, I think, DoD deserves some credit here for the outreach to Silicon Valley and recognizing that there's a problem that needs to be tackled. I was reading something the other day, and it was an Army Science Board study. And they said that, essentially by about 2025, to quote them, Army aviation will not be able to overmatch adversaries. So, in 10 years, right, that's not too long in the world of defense acquisition. They're saying that, Army aviation isn't going to cut it anymore. I think that's a bit of a wake-up call if there wasn't already one out there. In terms of maybe Silicon Valley a little bit more, I think one of the ways going forward is to see how we can link the traditional defense industrial base with the folks in Silicon Valley. Because as Stephen mentioned, a lot of those folks out there, they know who DoD is, but for plenty of different reasons, they're not too psyched about doing a lot of business with them. But is there a way for the traditional defense industrial base to link with those folks in Silicon Valley to help them bridge budget gaps, figure out what's going on inside the bureaucracy, right? Because that's a real specialized task that only folks that are part of the defense industrial base understand, for better or worse. So there's some ways there I think we could all work together and hopefully generate the kind of innovation and deliver it to the warfighter in a timely manner.
Now, we've talked a couple possible solutions or things that should be done to improve this innovation gap, or however we want to talk about it. You just mentioned SOCOM. There's, I think a lot of you have written about different things, but if you're on this, so let's talk different timescales. The next year's defense authorization bill is one big opportunity for moving new policies, solutions forward. The administration, certainly the Pentagon, has the ability to do a number of things independently, and then there will be a new administration in January 2017. Looking across those timescales, what would you say are the things that leaders in the Pentagon, in Congress, and then in the future administration should be focusing on if we really want to improve the situation with innovation? Big question.
Well, big question. I guess I'll start out, putting my lawyer's hat on and picking up on a comment that Steve made, being that, if you're sitting in Silicon Valley, you kind of have to be crazy to take up the invitation that DoD is extending. I don't know, some obviously, may want to do it out of patriotism, trying to do what they can to support the warfighter, but it's certainly much more difficult than it needs to be, and certainly imposes very significant hurdles on getting the most innovative companies in America to partner with the existing defense industrial base, and poses a big hurdle for the existing defense industrial base. I mean, the regulatory barriers imposed on government contractors are huge, and they're difficult even for the traditional defense industrial base, as witnessed by the letter that 4 government contractor associations wrote in August to the White House, requesting no further presidential directives primarily focused on government contractors be issued for the foreseeable future. This is saying enough already. We who are masters of complying with bureaucratic rules can't take it anymore. And you can only imagine the challenges for people who are not used to that, and where the culture is not what it is here in the established community. So on issues like export controls or intellectual property, counterfeit parts in the supply chain, cybersecurity, the list could go on, and I can get into some of the specifics of this, but I think that's where I would focus, is basically regulatory simplification and rollback. That regulations have a tendency to increase over time. That's chronic in the federal government, and yet as they accumulate, they start to strangle the very programs that we want to have succeed. And so I don't really honestly think this is something that this administration at this point can take on, given the OMB deadline of finalizing rules 6 months ahead of the election or whatever. So all rules have to go final by June of next year. I just think, and particularly given frankly, the nature of this administration, which is probably a more regulatory administration than the previous one. But I think this is an important task for the next administration to focus on how can we do defense procurement in a less regulatory, burdensome way. It's not to say that we don't need regulation or that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there should be a focused look on, are we doing the minimum necessary to achieve the regulatory objectives? And I think there's a lot of room there.
Yeah, I'll offer another couple thoughts. From a Hill perspective, as a former Hill guy, and I know this is hard to do when you're a former Hill, or when you're a Hill guy, but I would say don't add more regulations to the mix to kind of echo what was just said. It just slows the process down. And that isn't to say that there isn't good regulation, there certainly is, but let's be smart about what we're doing. And if we are going to add new stuff, consider whether or not it makes sense to have a sundown provision with it, so that if it doesn't work, it just disappears, and we're not stuck fighting it for decades and decades. One other observation is, Heidi Shue, who's the Army Acquisition executive, was speaking earlier this year, and she sort of equated the acquisition process to a big bus. And I've talked with a few folks about this before, but I think it's a good example. And she said, when you think about it, the program manager is the driver of the bus. And he's got the steering wheel and the brakes and the gas pedal, but all the guys in the back, those are all the other folks that are part of the acquisition process. But imagine they all have a handbrake. And they can't do anything but pull the handbrake. So what are they going to do? They're going to pull the handbrake, right? Now, in theory, the PM is the person in charge, but he's got all these guys in the back slowing them down. And her take is, look, we've got to throw some people off the bus, meaning figure out a way to simplify the process, put the PM in charge, give him real authority, and then hold them responsible. And so I think that's something that we can continually do, and the department can do it internally, to try and get a better handle on how programs work through the process. I'm curious to see what's going to happen given the NDA language on service chiefs taking a greater role in acquisition, if that will drive any change in terms of personal responsibility for some of these programs or not. We'll see.
Yeah, I like what Jerry said earlier about other transaction authorities. Here's the deal, though. I mean, I've written about this, other people have written about this. Other transaction authorities and partnership intermediary agreements, they've been around since Eisenhower, back when universities were the primary driver of innovation, right? That's where cool stuff came out of, not the labs, not DARPA, universities. So Eisenhower, 60 years ago now, put out these opportunities to engage non-traditionals. And again, a non-traditional by federal statute is any company that in any given year has less than $500,000 in federal R&D funding, okay? So just kind of bracket that in your mind for a second. So they've been around for a while, so why haven't why haven't we solved this nut? I think the reason why is what we were talking about earlier, which is barriers to entry. So OTAs and PIAs are designed to rapidly access cool, interesting technologies, preferably something that is still working its way at the technology readiness level ladder, and engage them in the federal government, right? So say someone found, I don't know, Nest when it was still being incubated and built out. An OTA or a PIA would be a rapid-fire contracting mechanism to quickly get them federal dollars to do federal stuff. Fair enough. The problem is that's, going to a non-traditional and then giving them a, even if you skip past the RFP, offering them an entree into the federal government and its own Byzantine land of regulations and compliance and contracting officers to navigate is a considerable burden. I mean, from putting a venture capital hat back on, look, I mean, what I would advise, venture-backed companies that I talk to is you're going to need to hire 2 or 3 people if you want to do business with the U.S. government. So you're a small seed or Series A backed company, and now you have to spend and that's money coming right out of your pocket, right out of your bottom line. You have to spend your dollars to hire 2 or 3 people just to engage the U.S. government for the hope and the opportunity of getting dollars out of the Pentagon, and that's just not attractive. It's not attractive at all. So I think what you need to do is get OTAs and PIAs, again, other transaction authorities and partnership intermediary agreements, and then build an incubator or an accelerator around those capabilities. So again, you're going to bring a mix of capabilities that enable incoming non-traditionals to actually operate within the Pentagon. So whether that's someone, helping spell out all the acronyms, hopefully that's not the case, but whether it's acronyms, navigating the contracting process, figuring out how and who to partner with, you need that incubation capability to actually do business with the U.S. government if you're a dilettante, if you're a non-traditional that has no idea about DoD. So I think there's organizations, I think NDU is making strong progress in this area. They have their own ideas on it, but I think that's what needs to happen. I mean, at a tactical level, like what would you actually do? That's what you need to do.
Can I build off this for a second? The NDAA, again, that will likely get vetoed later this week, actually contains a number of acquisition reform proposals, but one of the things championed by Senator McCain is basically opening the aperture on rapid acquisition types of things. Do you think, is that a helpful thing? Is that just one piece of the puzzle? And for those of us, including me, who don't really know, does rapid acquisition, is all the same red tape in terms of compliance, auditing, everything, Peter, that you're talking about? Does that still apply, or I mean, is rapid acquisition any piece of a solution here?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the provisions, so.
Yeah. No, I guess in principle, is rapid acquisition that Senator McCain and those in the Senate want to push that type of acquisition, so not pulling things out of the kind of traditional acquisition process. One, for any of you, do you think that's helpful? And number 2, does that ease the burden on any of the kind of the red tape that is government contracting?
Well, yeah, others may be more familiar with the provision. I think in principle, anything that offers a way, whether it's for a non-traditional exemption or a rapid acquisition exemption, that allows program managers to waive or modify the application of some of the traditional requirements, that's a creative tool to go at the challenges I mentioned. You may be able to target your intervention in these ways without doing fundamental reform of the export control system or the IP system or whatever, but just saying this particular thing where we have a particular goal of getting non-traditionals involved or doing a particular rapid procurement, we're willing to make some compromises and trade-offs against some of those long-standing and appropriate objectives. But I don't know if others are more familiar with the specifics of what's being proposed.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not 100% up to speed on the specifics, but just a general observation, which would be, if it works, that's great, but you kind of have to wonder that is the only way to get things to work is to go around the system and do it outside of the system, right? So for example, everybody loves to talk about the MRAP program and why that worked. One of the answers to that question people offer is because they went outside the system to make it happen. And so, okay, that's great, but is that a long-term solution? Probably not.
Yeah, I would agree with that point. I mean, it's a stopgap, right? And we still need to fix the longer-term problems that we have in the system.
Well, I think that offers a cautionary tale as well. The organization that pushed MRAP out there, well, there's a couple organizations, but, JIDO and the Rapid Equipping Force, right? Where are those organizations now? JIDO, which is now JIDA, was demoted from the undersecretary level down to AT&L, right? The Rapid Equipping Force is now residing within the Arctic at TRADOC. So what happened, right? These organizations had successes, right? Quite a bit of successes, granted with almost a stupid amount of money, but they got the stuff out there, right? They actually supported the warfighter. So what happened? Well, what happened was they became sustainment organizations. They were producing stuff, again, that no one was buying. So after a while, more and more of their budget went to sustaining the stuff that they were already working on or producing. So, at a certain point, they did a program review and said, well, where are you guys now? And, unfortunately, the results, were less than significant. So you had two organizations that actually did rapidly field technology, and then now they've both been demoted and rolled up. I think that offers, again, does that mean you don't do what we're talking about? No, of course not. But it does serve as a cautionary tale towards people such as myself coming in back into the industry and proposing solutions. I think that's a useful analog.
Yeah. All right. One last question for me, and then we'll open it up to the public here. We've talked about some failures. One of the kind of bumper stickers, and I think a few of you have written about this, for acquisition reform is fail early and fail often. So clearly we've got the fail often part figured out. What's the concept there, and why is it hard? And why is it hard for the government? I mean, they've got the fail often part down. They've got a 2% transition rate. What would that actually look like? How do you fail early and fail often without being wasteful? What's the key change there that you'd be advocating for if you agree with that bumper sticker, and if you don't, feel free to disagree.
Well, I think I'll just offer a brief blurb. Innovation only works when you have license to fail. But we're in an environment right now, which has always been the case, where you have zero tolerance for failure, right? If any of you who are prior military service, like, what happens to your promotion prospects if you have anything less than, promote far above peers, on your OER? Like, you're dead. Same thing with these programs. So what happens is we gloss over inconsistencies or challenges because we have this mindset that, well, as has been described to me, well, look, if we fail, people die. And I as a son of an Army officer, I appreciate that very much, but that's also complete hogwash, and that totally whitewashes DoD's outstanding history of innovation. As Sam and I wrote, and Sam can talk to this more, we failed constantly in the 50s. Like, how many, I think in the article we wrote, like, how many rockets blew up on the launch pad? I mean, we put Chuck Yeager in a rocket and shot him off into the atmosphere just to see if we could break the speed of sound. And yet now when I go to Afghanistan, guess how long my radio works before it crafts out, or my flashlight. So I'm speaking in vagaries here, but the idea is that we can fail, but the important thing is to fail quickly, right? fail early, fail often. That's great. There's a lot of people in the venture capital community that will push their investments to fail. Not because they want to lose money or because they want a poorly performing track record, but they say, look, like, you know, I want you to work as hard as you can, but if it's not going to work, that's cool. I just want to know.
Yeah, I think that's a good point on the space piece there, but there's a real urgency to get stuff done, and so failure was, I think, acceptable, and people would take risks to make things happen. I'm not sure the same atmosphere exists now. Another idea, perhaps, in terms of how to fail more quickly is to work with the department to put together a credible plan when you're looking at these programs and stick to it, right? We spend years debating requirements, trying to fit stuff into the budget, and it just goes round and round before you actually get to bending any metal. And you spend years before you get to that point. On the plus side, the department has been taking some good steps, and I think, you know, the idea of having continuous competition as far as you can into the development process is a good idea, because it does incentivize companies to kind of one up the next guy, to take a little bit of risk, and maybe their product doesn't work, and then the next guy, you know, has a chance to move it on down the line a little bit more. So there's opportunities like that, I think, where we could inject, you know, continuous competition into the process, adopt a plan and kind of stick with it the best we can, even though that's hard. And by doing that, you'll be able to, you know, you'll go through a few failures, but I think you'll be able to keep the process rolling.
All right. Well, I have plenty more questions. So if there's not questions in the public, I'll continue asking, but I do see that there are questions here. So just a reminder again, please wait for a microphone so that the recording and folks online can hear you, and identify yourself before asking a question.
Hi, Doug Ollivant with Mandate International. Good to see you all here. Peter talked about, I think, one side of the problem. You know, we obviously, as the MRAP case showed, weren't really good at picking up solutions from the field, or picking up requirements from the field and bringing them to a solution. But I think we need to also look at the other side of the program. We have no real mechanism to find solutions that are out there that no one in DoD has ever asked for, because they never imagined that it was possible. And as more of the innovation moves in, you know, once we get away from ships of the line and combat aircraft, the innovation is going to be in the private sector, mostly in smaller companies. But DoD isn't set up for that. We have labs, we have DARPA. They're more set up to build than to find, bring in, and weaponize. As I've told people, you know, the saddest place to be if you're a small company with a great technology is to have a DARPA program manager who has something inferior to that he's really proud of. Or conversely, the number of labs that are trying to reverse engineer something that IBM commoditized last year. And how do we pull in these innovations and realize that a lot of the time we just need to go buy, and, you know, maybe buy and weaponize, but just go buy what DoD is set up to build, or at least the labs are set up to build. So with the new innovation in the private sector, Steve talked about it migrating from the universities to the labs. I think now it's migrated from the labs clearly to the private sector. How do we pull that in?
I think it's a great point, Doug. And look, it's a new organization. One organization I'm familiar with is the National Security Technology Accelerator, and that's up in over at NDU. And I think the point you're highlighting is one around tech scouting, right? So, in other words, how do you find cool technology? It's probably a long acronym in DoD that describes what I just said. So tech scouting, how do you actually find the cool technology? That's the other hand on what we've been describing, right? So on one hand, making things attractive, but in this case, this is not something where if you build it, they will come, right? You have to be out there in the community, and I think that is where things like DOIX, part of the Defense Innovation Imperative or Initiative, is helpful. However, keep in mind the two other components to the DII were the Defense Innovation Marketplace and the Long Range Research and Development Plan, collectively known as LRDIP. So guess how DoD, speaking of tech scouting, and I'll shut up with this, guess how DoD launched these two initiatives? Over FedBizOps. Guess who reads FedBizOps? The people already in the system. So then they say, oh, gee, like we really didn't get that great of a response rate. And my response is exactly, because no one, God help us, at Pinterest Facebook, Google, Nest, you name it, no one is reading Fed BizOps. So you have to be out there in more creative ways, and I think that is something where I would happily give a hat tip to DoD for pushing forward with UIX.
Yeah, I also think it's a great comment, and it may be that the most important fruit from the Secretary's initiative is just better communication between the DoD and the most innovative companies in America, so that they will be more aware of what ideas, what could be done, to your point. And so even if those companies aren't actually willing to run the gauntlet of DoD procurement, I'm sure they'd still be interested in, brainstorming and giving suggestions. Oh, who knew you wanted to do that? You should go talk to so-and-so. Those are useful conversations, I'm sure. And then also note that a lot of those companies are ratcheting up their presence in DC. So I think for a long time, the culture out there was stay as far away from DC as you can. But they've substantially bolstered DC presence in recent years, and I think that will help with the communication between the Pentagon and those industries.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, and when I was doing some reading the other day, I came across a piece by Byron Callan, who is in the back there. But it's a really stunning, I think, piece of information, and it is that Microsoft, Google, and Apple invested 5 times more in R&D than the 5 largest defense contractors. So, yes, the model we've had has been built around, okay, the department comes up with some requirements to work with industry, and you kind of work your way down the line there. But given that amount of money that's floating around, whether it's in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, you have to imagine that there's some great technologies that we could use. And when Stephen talks about these innovative small companies not wanting to get tied up with the department because of just all the bureaucracy, I think one way the department could try and look at this is, well, they have to get out there more. But they could probably get out there as the first customer for a lot of these folks. These small companies, they don't necessarily need more money, right? There's a gazillion dollars in VC money floating around out there, but they do need a customer for some of their projects. So that's what I would suggest that the department do, is to continue to be active, build on the Silicon Valley outreach, and try to be the first customer for some of this innovative technology.
Other questions?
Yes, hello. I'm former Army officer. I've done special access programs. I did like the CIPs for development of Task Force 21, Ranger, the whole thing. But what I'm trying to find out is to what degree are the folks that are developing these products in the labs actually just kind of embedding with you to find out exactly what they need, so we don't have this, I guess, like 2% that of equipment that's actually being fielded.
So, to make sure I understand your question correctly, you're saying to what degree are these companies engaging with the labs? Is that
Warfighter.
the companies like the non-traditionals, or just any of them? Well, I think we have actually this is, Peter's probably better qualified to answer this, but I think we have a contracting process that's set up that kind of keeps them apart. Actually, that's one of my recommendations, is take a new look at Simpson Bowles, which has created, intentionally or unintentionally, a demarcation between the contracting officers evaluating the opportunities and the actual opportunity itself, which means that you have very good and well-intentioned Americans evaluating stuff that, in a lot of cases, quite frankly, they just really don't understand. So in that case, LPTA, it's kind of a misnomer, because if you're being evaluated on a technical volume, right, management volume, past performance volume, and then cost volume, right? If you have someone looking at the other three, I mean, the people in the community already are sophisticated, right? So they know how to write to those proposals. They've all been to the same Shipley's courses, and they're gonna snowball you on technical volume, on the management volume, and on the past performance volume. So what's the lowest common denominator? Cost. So then they're going to look at it and say, well, your price is 2 and your price is 3, so 2 wins. So, I mean, look, best value, I'm a huge fan, like everyone is, of best value, but, I mean, we've been operating in a de facto state of LPTA for some time. And that's from personal experience, when I was in DC before.
Other questions?
I guess it's Emil Main from Raytheon. I guess this question is for Peter or the rest of the panelists. But in talking about defense reform, one issue that really hasn't come up is discussions on how we deal with contracting. I guess I'm specifically interested in, Peter, your thoughts on the department's emphasis on FPIF contracts through FMS, and what are some of the implications you think this has for the industrial base?
Can you define FPIF? Sorry? Can you define FPIF? Or?
No, I can't, but my colleague Jade, perhaps, are you familiar? No, I missed it. Emil, can you spell it out a little? Sorry.
Specifically in the implementation language of better buying power, I believe it's 3.0, the department's emphasis on pursuing FPIF, firm fixed price incentive fee contracts, when applicable both domestically and internationally. But I think what the specific point of that is just how that might inhibit the competitiveness of U.S. companies internationally when they're dealing with a particular contract type that other competing international companies are not.
Mm-hmm. I'm not really the right person to address that issue. Jerry, I don't know if you might have some thoughts on that, or Jade?
My sense, I'm Jade Tubman, I'm a colleague of Peter's. My sense is that anytime you start putting more focus on the FFP universe of contracting, whether it's pure firm fixed price or firm fixed price with an incentive, you are putting more risk on the contractors themselves and perhaps making them more risk averse because there's a fear that they aren't going to recover what they invest. In terms of how that affects contractors internationally, obviously, if they aren't being compensated on their contracts on an apples-to-apples type basis with their foreign competition, that hurts. And you brought up FMS. In that context, even there would have to be, I think, a shift in how the Department of Defense runs the FMS program, even to accommodate something like a firm fixed price plus incentive fee, because FMS is a good case study of how a focus on firm fixed price can, in some ways, go to the detriment of industry, because you have a foreign purchaser that would need to buy a product through the U.S. government, essentially at the cost of the government, the U.S. government. And so the U.S. government buys that, typically through a firm fixed price or type basis. But the more variability that is built into that, whether it's a cost type basis or incentive fee within the transaction that the U.S. government is purchasing that item, it can inflate the price of the product being purchased by the foreign government, which then kind of goes into the calculus that the foreign government has as to whether to even enter into that transaction.
Thanks. Maybe one more question? Jerry?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I guess, one question, as to you all about both for non-U.S. companies that are interested in the DoD marketplace. What can we as a DoD customer do to improve kind of the attractiveness of that market, other than the the fact that the budget line is much higher than most other other countries. And then secondly, what to do for the Silicon Valley efforts or for the non-traditional efforts? What is your sense, Stephen and Sam and others, as to what DoD can do to help improve how we do it? I recognize the limitations of using Fed BizOps and so on, but what are we missing in that area that would be something that a line of inquiry that would be good for us to pursue? Thanks.
Well, I guess, Jerry, one comment I have, and Sam may have some further perspectives on this, is that a lot of this is perception in the foreign defense industrial base, and it's important for them to see high-profile successes in terms of DoD procurements from foreign suppliers. And so something like the tanker program, not a success from that perception standpoint, because I think whatever the merits are, it was perceived in Europe as the U.S. basically saying, you know, even though Airbus was a better target or source, we're going to go with Boeing, kind of a Buy America approach on the program. I'm not taking sides on the merits of the procurement, but I think that is how it was. I've heard it expressed in Europe that, you know, that just shows that the U.S., when its chips are down, won't buy our stuff. So finding ways to, you know, where the merits justify having a high-profile foreign procurement, I think would go a long way. I think also some of this is about just making it, you know, as clear and simple as possible as far as how the procurement process works. I mean, we have clients who come to us, you know, just tell me what I need to do to sell to the U.S. government. And I mean, we can do that for them, but they shouldn't have to ask us for that information, that level of information. That should be something that there's an easy, off-the-shelf guide for, aimed specifically at foreign companies, because they do present different issues, you know, for example, in terms of export controls, as you know. You know, what are the basics, 101, for a foreign company seeking to deal with the U.S. procurement system?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's certainly a perception that kind of floats around out there that, to use your words, when the chips are down, you know, some of the more international competitors may be out of luck. And, you know, it's tough to say if that's 100% true or not. You know, certainly at my company, we've had successes and we've had failures, and that's just sort of the way it goes in industry. But I would suggest that when we do have conversations with senior folks in the department or on the Hill, they're always welcoming, and they say, hey, we'd love to have more competition, bring your technology, you know, keep expanding your production facilities here in the U.S. and so forth. And that's great, but sometimes we'll run into situations when we get down to the nitty-gritty of a program where it almost seems as if the requirements were written for somebody else's product and you don't have a chance. And so, you know, there's maybe been a handful of high-profile competitions, one of which was tanker. But if you look at presidential helicopter, the last CSAR program, right, those were opportunities for international organizations to play, and either they won and lost, or they just didn't play because they felt the deck was stacked against them in one way or another. So I think the department really needs to take a look at that and go, are we really doing everything we can to make sure that we've got the maximum amount of competition and that we're treating people equally, perceived or not?
Yeah, I've got 3 recommendations for you. Little did you know. And I should say publicly that Jerry is a good friend, and I actually, before he went into the government, he actually taught me a lot about you know, industrial-based policy. So it was a pleasant coincidence when I found out he was going to MIBP. So the three recommendations I have are, number one, and DoD is actually doing some of these already, so it's not all bad. First off, if you're going to create a new organization, make sure to nest it in an area that's really hard to say no to, like OMB or with DUIX within the Undersecretary's office, right? Like, or Deputy Secretary's office. That tends to be helpful, because starting new stuff is hard no matter what, but especially in DoD where the knives come out when you try to do anything new, however worthy it is. Number two, if you're going to innovate, that's great, but make sure to innovate radically on the new stuff while, innovating marginally on the stuff that's already running. So if you're going to start a new program, that's your shot. That's your opportunity to do something great and fantastic. Don't go into DoD to an existing program or with an existing organization and start, proposing how to do cold fusion again. So nest new organizations in areas that are hard to say no to. Innovate radically on the new stuff and new stuff alone. And then lastly, focusing resources across DoD, specifically on the topic that you're most interested in. Coming from the commercial side, you hear people talk, especially in the like in New York. There's some money on the sidelines in New York right now, and you hear people talk who obviously don't know what they're talking about, speaking breathless terms about how much money DoD has, right? They'll say, oh, their budget's $600 billion. They've got to have at least $50 billion available to spend on like IT or on cyber. Maybe, I don't know what the actual number is, but there's one small catch in that. There's 50 different cyber agencies within DoD right now. So first off, as a BD or sales guy, like that sucks, right? Because that means like your God, what do they call it? Your available market, or your total available market is the investment term, your TAM. Just got a hell of a lot smaller, which probably destroys your investment thesis to begin with. And secondly, that means that even if you have $50 billion, but you have 50 different agencies, say they're rank ordered in some kind of pyramid scheme where the agency you're talking to is probably at the bottom, which means they probably have $5 million to spend. Well, again, there goes your sales strategy. So it's important that if you're going to start something new, or from an industry perspective, whether it's a tanker or a new pen, or on the non-traditional side, you focus the resources on what you're actually interested in. So like the Flex Tech Alliance that they announced, well, first off, I thought that was interesting because that organization has actually been around for some time. And indeed, Apple was, as they noted it later on, is indeed not part of the Flex Tech Alliance, which again is interesting because from a non-traditional perspective, a couple, marquee companies were touted as being part of that, and they promptly said, no, we're not part of that. Which is interesting from a presidential initiative perspective. But also, if you're going to start something new, at least focus on what you guys are doing, right? Focus on those existing areas. So whether it's wearables or innovative new fibers or unmanned systems, augmented reality, virtual reality, just make sure to target those resources, because when it gets diffuse, number one, that diffuses your dollars, and that also creates a series of fiefdoms, which, as you guys said, will, much like the DARPA quote, will all be feuding over each other for control and money.
Well, on that pleasant note, I think we have to end. So please join me in thanking the panelists and Jerry for